10 o'clock, so we'll make a start. Welcome to Exceptional Effort Business Sunday. Today we're talking about dealing with difficult times, staying motivated, positive, and looking forward. Morning, everybody. How are you today?
Morning.
Cold in Canberra.
Fair enough too. So we definitely have some challenging times for some people, some booming times for other people as well. So it's not just one thing. Is obviously in the news is quite, as you would expect, is quite negative when you look at the news. But obviously, a number of companies, especially retail, in the grocery sector, they're having busier times than they have at Christmas. So that's is a positive, but also too it's difficult for some people as well. So when we're dealing with these difficult times, it is always important to find ways of staying motivated, staying positive, and how to look forward. So want to take it away with that? Does anyone have any experiences they want to share on from their experience of how they've had a challenge in that regard?
I haven't had any personal challenges, but I know a lot of people that have, and I think that there's a lot of generalizations in, the government's doing, I think, a great job in providing some form of what I call instant cash flow. And I think that's the pain points when we've all read the news and we know that hospitality and industries like that have just literally just stopped. And, we dig into the casuals, the people that have overseas visas. There's a whole bunch of people that just lose their instant cash flow, and even the government support doesn't, you finish up on a Tuesday, there's not a deposit in your bank account on the Thursday. And I think that's the real scary challenge that we generalize about. And I think people in those shoes, you'd have people there who are saying, let's not worry about paying the rent. I need to pay my mobile phone bill. I need food for myself and my family. I think that's the real thing that is going to bubble up and surface in the coming weeks.
Cash flow is always going to be important, and it's really hard in those situations, like from a business perspective, or it can be hard if you haven't been very well. But same token too, one of my clients is in a cash flow problem, and they were in a cash flow problem before this arose. But what they've been able to do, and they were working on this with the bank beforehand, is they've actually got their overdraft got extended, and so that's where they got a lot of support. And they were a little bit behind on some of their payments and they're pushing things out. They worked with the bank. The bank has supported them, extended their overdraft, and now they've brought everything up to date, and they're continuing on with their trading. And this is one thing to do is I think, from that perspective of when you have a problem, generally it's to deal with it and look for ways of resolving it. So I think this is one of those things of looking forward and staying positive. Sometimes we can go, oh my God, what am I going to do? And your brain shuts down and you can't really think of solutions. Whereas if you go, okay, I've got a problem. How am I going to solve this? How are we going to overcome this? And so the banks are loaning money. They're still, as an example with that particular client, they've extended their overdraft. They've got all their creditors up to date, and they're continuing forward. And I think this is one of the ways of staying in difficult times, is to remember to ask the questions and look for those solutions, because they might be out there.
I'm a big believer in putting your hand up, for a long time. Like now, technically, I'm 90% down on my normal income for the next, 11 weeks, hopefully, 7 weeks, depending on what the government says. But for a long period of time, I've technically only get paid 4 times a year at the end of each school term. So if you can imagine, December 15th is my last payment until Easter. So I've managed how to extend and work through that. But over the years, I've tried to create my own toolbox on inner strategies, which then I believe become habits or positive triggers when pressured or tested. And it's a huge thing to only let yourself control the things that you can control. Once you start to control outside things that you can't control, that's when that pressure rises. and a lot of people do fall down.
Expand on that about controlling things you can't control, Pete. What do you mean by that?
When things are out of your control, like the government shutting down the schools, if I could control that and no one would get sick, I'd want to open the schools, but I can't. So, I have to then not look at the same problem or situation from the same standpoint. I have to get up and walk around. If I can't see other avenues, I then, like anyone else, should put your hand up and say, can anyone see something I can't? I'm a big believer in the pillars of strength. To have people around you so you don't fall, and be a pillar for someone else. And that's about being honest and truthful to yourself.
So what you're saying is there's work with what is that what's in front of you, be aware of what's in front of you and work with that, as opposed to not, or pretending it doesn't exist, or trying to control something you can't control, but work with what is and move forward from there. Is that, am I understanding correct?
Yeah, exactly. Like you were saying before, don't try and hide things away that are difficult. Like a phone bill, don't slide it under the microwave and hope to hell that someone else is going to pay for it. Your subconscious knows it's there, but your conscious is trying to hide it. And that's where we conflict on the inside. So, as I said before, knowing who you are, trying to keep a positive attitude, and keep that normal routine, especially when you can't control things. Like a lot of people now out of work are starting to sleep in longer. Oh, whoops, did I have a shower today? So I think it's very important to try and keep a sense of normal as much as you can.
There's a couple of things in there that are very powerful. So fear equates to paralysis. And if you get into a point of fear and you're spiraling around one thing, then it becomes another, then it becomes another. Things get bigger perceptibly in your brain than they actually are. So we start to catastrophize. And so the other important thing to explore is structure. In our everyday, when things are normal, we have a structure that kind of works for us. And when that's blown away for whatever reason, whether it's through a crisis like is happening right now, or whether it's through losing someone dying in your life, or something major that impacts your every being, every minute of every day, then we have to try and find ways through. And that sounds really simplistic, but it's actually exceptionally hard. It is, however, the trick. If you can provide yourself out of seemingly nothing a new structure that starts to build some success for you each day in moving forward, in whether it's in baby steps or in a week's time or a month's time, something that looks something more like normal, that provides a bit of hope and a bit of way forwarding. This is a crisis, and I don't want to minimise in any way the pain and suffering that's going on around us. I think it's really simple when you haven't had life crises to go back to places of knowing, or something that you've been taught, and speak about it in a very general way as though it's going to work for everybody. It's not. But each and every person knows what works for them, what keeps them happy, what makes them smile, whether it's reading a book, whether it's going back to basics and going, oh, I need to get up at 7, I need to go for a walk, I need to make the most painful call today is organising a bill extension, or whatever it is. Get that done first. The most painful thing that you have to do that day, get it done first, get it out of the way. Have an arrangement in place. Start planning, start tracking. It's so, so important. So important.
Yeah, and I think Ingrid, you touched on the point there. You mentioned, fear. And I come back to an end tragedy, and I'm sure many of us have faced close ones who have died, and it's a momentary tragedy in one sense, and life does go back to normal. But it's that fear, and if the majority of people have never experienced this type of, call it a tragedy, where loss of income, loss of jobs, there are people out there and businesses that have been very successful, and all of a sudden it hits a brick wall. You take Virgin Airlines, for instance. People have been with that company for, say, 15 years. You've got pilots there that just stop, and they don't necessarily have many other skill sets. So it's the fear of this doesn't happen to me, and they've got to deal with that. And yes, bills are mounting up, and they've got, how do they explain to their children that we have to put our house up for sale if that's the worst case scenario? And they're very tough and fearful decisions. And I love that advice of taking the most difficult ones and approaching it. And as Pete said, sliding the bills under the microwave, it doesn't solve it. It's easy to do, but it is, almost creating those lists of fearful things, almost challenges, and just tackling them. And that's a lot easier said than done. We've all been in different difficult situations. I remember in the recession in the early 90s, I was retrenched. And I remember it clearly. I was a state manager, and we all got done. And I remember standing on the steps of Electrolux down in Glen Waverley, I think it was, crying, saying, "This doesn't happen to me. This happens to someone else. What have I done wrong?" So, they're the fearful, tough things. And we all survive. We do move on, but it doesn't necessarily seem that way at that point in time.
It's important that you mention the fear that we've talked about, and I think that's one of the things that really helps is your focus. And it can be challenging to do, because in those moments, as you say, it becomes very emotional, and whatever we attach emotion to a thought, it becomes a lot stronger and more powerful in our mind. And this is, from my experience, there's a number of experiences I've gone through which are really, really tough. One example was someone made false reports to the police that I'd committed fraud, convincingly enough that I was actually arrested. I got fingerprinted, had mugshots taken, was interviewed, went through that whole process, sat in the little chair that's bolted to the floor in an awkward position, and went through that process. And at the end of it, the police have released me without charge because there was no basis for it to start with. And in those moments, they become really highly emotional, and the focus on that fear then becomes stronger and more powerful in your mind, and then it's harder to see a way forward. And this is where it's really important, from my perspective, how I deal with those situations. I have a whiteboard in my house, and what I do is, when I'm feeling fearful, I'll get on the whiteboard and I'll write out what I want, or as I term it, what I choose, because I like to say, what do you choose? Because it gives you that power, that you actually have that choice. So I write out, this is what I choose for my future. And because I've written that out clearly on a whiteboard, nice and big, that becomes a more prominent focus for me. And there it is there for me to look at every day. And then from that, then under that I write how, with a question mark. So I'm retraining my brain. I'm taking that highly emotional situation from the fear, and then focusing my energy in a different direction, going, this is what I've chosen for my future, and I'm asking myself a question: how do I get there? And then I start to see opportunities to move forward and take those steps. And then I find that it helps relax, so that energy disappears, that negative energy, if you want, that fearful energy disappears, and I start to find ways of stepping forward. That's one approach that I use, is clearly writing out what I want and training my brain to focus on that outcome as opposed to focusing on the fear.
I think that's sorry, Victor, you're right.
Go for it, Pete.
No, ladies first.
I was just saying, thank you. Inaction is really your own worst enemy, because it just accumulates and accumulates, that emptiness, that lack of purpose. So yes, absolutely, starting to either quantify what's scaring you and kind of deconstructing it, or setting yourself some goals that are very clear and attainable and maybe scalable in some way in terms of complexity, and tackle what you can and just work through it very systematically.
Yeah, just to add to that, Ingrid, really good point. From the mental and emotional defence viewpoint, I look at individuals, including myself, as how far do we look down the track, and how far down the track can we cope? And if we're looking too far and we're not coping, is to bring that track point back. So don't look months ahead, don't look weeks ahead, just take maybe 4 or 5 days ahead. And if we're tracking okay there, build that resilience to then maybe track 2 weeks down the track. But if you still can't do that, track it back to, even a day or tomorrow or even today. All I'm coping with is today. And so set that strength up by choosing how far you look. And so I work with a few people that are only doing it sometimes hour by hour, and then the high risk minute by minute. And that's, as we said before, don't be afraid to put your hand up.
Absolutely. And it creates a mindfulness in your practice every day. And I think that we need to be mindful at the moment that there are people that will be starting to or already in a point of mental unwellness at the moment, outside of what they're comfortable with, and even to the point of feeling, quite at risk in their lives. And so, yes, absolutely, track it back. Don't measure yourself in a fixed way. Each success is really important.
Yeah, and that's more good points, Peter, and, talking about people start to, especially if people have a lot of spare time on their hands now, there's time for the brain to go into overdrive. Yeah. And I call it the what if scenarios, or what if this happens? What if I don't get a job? What if the business does fail? And they do start tracking out 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8 months. And in this particular environment, no one knows what's going to happen in 3 or 6 months from a government point of view, let alone our day-to-day lives. So dealing with the day-to-day, week-to-week, whatever works for you is really important. Be aware of the future, but as soon as you start digesting all those things, it becomes overwhelmed, and there is inaction, and you just hit the Netflix button or whatever you do and put your head back in the sand. And that brings up that whole, the mental illness scenario that is being spoken about, but I think that's going to be a tsunami in the coming months of how people do cope with the changes that are going on. Some people will be fine, others people won't, but I think that's going to be a real potential issue down track as well.
To add to that, Julian, even myself, the provider, the giver, sometimes having that void going, but hang on, I've got self-worth here, and if I'm not out, providing that and bringing it back to the family, what steps or what tools should I put in place? I've even gone back butchering 2 days a week. That was my early years. And what I'm on per hour in my normal business compared to butchering, I still have to disregard the value of the money, but just the worth or the effort that I'm putting in for my family. And Ingrid was talking about the future, and so were you, Julian. To me, there's no such thing as the future, but as you said, Julian, we must plan for it. We'll go to bed tonight, we'll wake up, it'll be today again. There's moments in time, and we're always going to be tested. And to me, a test is just a series of questions or problems, or even physical responses designed to determine your knowledge, intelligence, or ability. And depending on those last 3 answers of your knowledge, intelligence, or ability is how we're going to get through stuff. But yeah, so I'm very a moment person, living in the moment. Like right now, I'm 100% here in this conversation. Not once have I thought about what I'm going to do after this, or so. It's that mental strength, and where we're going to have a lot of people falling over because of that.
So also, I think that the point that you all raised there as well is that this focusing on the now and dealing with what you're dealing with. But adding to that is rewarding yourself for the things that you do right as well, because sometimes it's really easy, especially when there's a lot of negativity coming out, especially if you're watching the news a lot. I literally do not watch the news. I haven't looked at, I couldn't tell you. I've got the coronavirus app on my phone, and if the government sends a message, then I'll check up on what that is. But other than that, I literally don't look at the news because it's so negative. But what I've found is also to making sure you reward yourself, because in these times you can really beat yourself up, as in you haven't done the right thing, or this went wrong, or I didn't do that right. And that creates a whole, I found from my own experience when I've been in really tough times, is to, at the end of the day when I go to bed, if I'm dealing in those times like we talk about where I'm dealing moment to moment, I will reward at the end of the night as I'm laying in bed, I will think through the things, what did I do right? What did I like about what I did today? And that makes me feel good about what I'm doing. Changes again, moving away from that fearful energy or thinking fearfully to things that are going, okay, I dealt with that situation well, I dealt with that well, or I learned this, and that can help me move forward. And I found that helps give me that positive attitude and that focus forward, which then relaxes your mind. When your mind is stressful, under stress, it's like it's got blinkers on. You can only see straight forward. You can't see things around you. You go into that fight or flight mode, or fight, flight, or freeze mode. And we generally, as a survival mechanism, will either freeze or run away. Very few people fight because it's just more dangerous that way. And so when you're in that high stress situation, all you can think about is what's directly in front of you. You can't have that broader thinking. So I've found from my experiences, at the end of the day, I reward myself and make myself feel good about the things that I did. And they might be only little things, but as a result of that, my mind opens up a little bit more, and then I can start to see other things that will help me and solve those problems. So, and I think that's really important, is to have that focus and reward yourself for the things that you do right, so that you can open your mind up and allow you to see other ways of solving the problems.
It is a regeneration. You need to be well in any moment in time, to do well and to plan for a future. And I actually agree with you, Pete. It is all about living in the moment, one moment at a time, exceptionally well. And for some, that's more real than others. But planning, I think there are some management tools that you can bring into the mix that provide for a little distraction from anything that's not a healthy distraction. So it provides that structure. It allows you to go, oh, I'm going to aim for this, whether this is getting through the day or having a conversation around trying to surface your business again, or trying to keep your family well and happy, or all of the above. But structure does allow you to plan through that a little bit. And it doesn't mean that your focus should stray from living in the moment well.
Agree.
Yeah, it's it's obviously a balancing act of, looking at the now, 1 day, 3 days, and then, poking your head up and looking over the hill for whether it be 1 month or 3 months. But Jamie, and I think that's important about rewarding yourself, in that when you achieve in normal times, we talk about celebrating the wins, whether that's personally or in business. And often when normal times we're all busy and, we let the good things just slide through, and we always should be celebrating. So in this environment, if you have say you want to call the tax office, or you want to call a bank about a late payment, to make that phone call can be incredibly challenging for someone. But if you do that, you reward yourself, pat yourself on the back, that you can breathe that sigh of relief, and then you'll realize that most of the time it wasn't that hard. It was the fear that was preventing you from taking that action. So when you achieve something, no matter how small it is important to reward yourself. And whether that's, you smile at yourself in the mirror, or you go for a walk or buy a coffee, whatever that reward is, that's up to the individual. But it is important to reward, and then that allows you to go, okay, well, I managed to do that, I can take the next step now. So it becomes almost like not so much a walk in the park, but you realize what you can achieve when you thought you couldn't.
I call that the ripping of the Band-Aid. Either you rip it or you let others who are out of your control rip it, like the government, banks, etc., etc. So what Ingrid and what you were saying also before, Julian, was you get up and plan those hard things, get that out of the way first. Rewarding yourself is great. I just don't want people also to think that conversely, to discipline yourself for put penalties on yourself if you don't do things right. And that's where we start to break down. So we are going to trip, we are going to fall. I believe our life is like a heart rate monitor. There's going to be ups and downs. So when you're up, be mindful of the down, and when you're down, know that there's going to be an up. So it is that conscious mind setting.
It's a very good point that you raised there, Pete, is not to be critical of yourself when you do things wrong. The whole point of when we're learning something new, we're going to make mistakes. You're going to that, and what you should be doing is, if you make a mistake, if you do something wrong, you should actually reward yourself for that, because you're rewarding yourself for taking the step. And you can't, if it's when you, and even when you don't act and then you start to act, don't beat yourself up because you sat and procrastinated for an hour, for example. When you actually do something, go, well, actually, I'll reward myself now for doing that, because again, it creates that mood, that positive mind frame where you then open up your mind to doing things. And we're attracted to what we think about. So if you criticize yourself, you're going to be thinking of the things you did wrong, and then you're more likely to repeat them. That's why a lot of people repeat the same thing over and over again. And coming for an example is smoking. And I know from my experience of smoking, the reason I kept smoking was because I talked about myself being quitting smoking. When I stopped and said I'm going to be healthy, all of a sudden it was easy to quit. And this is where it's really important to reward yourself, not criticize yourself. And because if you criticize yourself, that's what you start to focus on. That creates a negative spiral which continues down. And you stop that and say, hey, that may have happened and I'm rewarding myself, I feel good about myself for doing this right now, then that feeds on itself and you start to move forward.
And
it's a very, sorry, Ingrid, you go.
Oh, sorry, we do see that as building resilience. That's what that is. It's seeing the success or the win out of what you've perceived to be a failure situation or a difficult situation. Every step through that you take actually builds resilience, and next time it won't be so difficult.
I just want to add that if since a young age all we've been told is negative connotations. No, you can't do this. No, you can't touch that. No, you can't eat that. No, you can't go there. So no wonder teenagers, by the time they get to 13, 14, just want to flip the bird at most people that are telling them what to do. If my son wants to come home from school and go for a kick of the footy, I say, sure, yes, you can, but just feed the dog and do your homework first. So in a reverse sense, where it would be good if we were born old and got to die young. But anyway, that's just a light-hearted note on today's chat.
Very good.
Nice.
But you're very right there, Pete. It is that focus on, and we are taught, and I think this is the awakening that we're going through. I know a lot of people now are starting to be aware that what you focus on is what you attract into your life. And the law of attraction is not new. It's been around for centuries. If you look at the Bible, for those of a Christian faith, it says pray as though it is real. So it's teaching you to focus on where you want to go. So it's not new, but I think we're becoming more aware now that if we can we focus on this outcome of where we want, as opposed to criticizing ourselves, because that's focusing on what we don't want. So focusing on what we want, especially in trying times, you have all these things, and that's where that emotion, this is where your emotional intelligence, growing your emotional intelligence is really important, because in those stressful times, all of a sudden your fight or flight kicks in, it's highly emotional, and we can, with strong emotional intelligence, flip that around and go, hang on a minute, what do I want? That's what I said before. What I do is write on my whiteboard clearly what I want. and that sets my focus forward. And a lot, then in just the fact of writing, I can feel it when I write it out. The fear starts to disappear almost immediately. And then I start to see with that fear gone, all of a sudden those blinkers we were talking about before disappear, and you start to see more opportunities and more ways forward, and being able to deal with that in these crisis situations.
Yes, I think that's what and I love that. I love what you do there, Damien. And with my clients, we go through goal setting and strategies, and writing things down is incredibly powerful. And we kind of have a lot of ideas in our heads or thoughts, but that can bounce around like a rubber ball. But when you write it down, it gives you clarity, and you can start to really see the trees through the woods. So I really encourage that, and I think we all probably could do more of that, even if it's just whatever system you use. And you don't have to write a whole story. You can write down 2 things, or just a handful of things is better than not writing down anything. As I say, little steps are better than no steps.
And the final level that I'd add to that is that we often have an ultimate goal, or a couple of ultimate goals in life that kind of are in our head. We live with it so innately that we don't speak about them often enough. And if we don't set or actually speak out the ultimate goals, then we kind of swim around in all directions and can be a little less purposeful than we need to be. So have a think about what your ultimate goal is, whether it's retiring in 5 years' time, whatever it looks like, pop it out there and let all the other goals swim up to that.
Yeah, I call that, in my goal setting template I work with my clients, it's called the audacious goal, and normally it's 3 to 5 years. And then we come back to today of how you achieve that. So I do a reverse goal setting template.
It's forever changing, isn't it, our goals, which should be.
Absolutely.
And as I said before, I think the goals are important, but we shouldn't get lost of the now. To watch 2 elderly people walk down the street hand in hand, or a sunrise. I think, as a young kid, I used to always set goals. But my grandfather used to say to me, never ever tell me what you're going to do, show me what you've done. And I've sort of tried to live by that. Otherwise, sometimes we set ourselves up to fail. But anyway.
All right, we have run out of time, so a great session I think we've had today. I mean, one of the key, just running through some of the key things we talked about, is one, putting your hand up. Make sure you ask for what you need. Don't be afraid to do that, and work with what is. So pay attention to what's around you and actually work with that. Fear is a paralysis, so we need to get control of that fear and give yourself a structure to help doing that. So we have a structure that we work with, and when crisis hits, we need to come up with a new structure and stick with that structure. So things like getting out of bed and showering and not sitting there watching Netflix all day, but having a routine that we stick to keeps us in good habits. And as we talked about as well, inaction is probably your worst enemy. So this is, again, having that routine so that you can continue to move forward and stay focused. And this is also noticing at the end of the day, or when you do something, reward yourself. Put yourself in that positive mind frame so that your mind is open to seeing opportunities. And what was the other thing? Build those resilience was what we talked about as well. So those little rewards of doing things right, or doing things that, taking those steps forward, helps build that resilience of moving forward. Just those little steps building on top of each other builds a resilience to move forward. So that's a summary of our show today, Exceptional Effort Business Sunday. We look forward to seeing you all next week. Thank you very much, everybody.
Sounds good. See you, everyone.
See you. Bye-bye. Have a good Sunday.